The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Young American Podcast with your host, the Kid Constitution himself, Joseph Bemister.
Hello and welcome to the Young American. Welcome back for people who have been listening. Today, we are live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Find us on iHeartRadio, YouTube Live, the podcast app from Apple. This podcast is fully fact-based about politics, opinionated about our government, laws, how the government's changing for the good and bad in our eyes, and through my libertarian views and the point of view of my guest. Today we have Caleb Dyer. Thank you for coming on.
No problem. Happy
Caleb,
to be here.
What's your position in government?
So I am a state representative. I represent the towns of Hudson and Pelham, Hillsborough's 37th district. Apart from that, I also serve as the Libertarian floor leader. So I represent the Libertarian Party on the floor of the House of Representatives, and all of the policies that which we support or oppose.
Being libertarian government, do you feel in New Hampshire that you're the minority of the government?
We are numbers-wise minority of the government. We only have currently 3 seats in the House of Representatives. All of us actually were elected under either the Republican label or the Democratic label. 2 of us were elected as Republicans, 1 as a Democrat. And apart from that, we don't have very many friends in the legislature. I would like for voters to give us more friends. Yeah, no, we are most certainly a minority. We have to routinely work with, issue-based coalitions. So we have to find common ground with either Democrats or Republicans in order to sway a particular issue. So,
how easy or hard is that?
It largely depends on the issue. One such issue that was recently discussed was the death penalty. Where libertarians, our party platform calls for the abolition of the death penalty. We do not believe that it is reasonable or just when there is such a margin of error in actually effectuating that kind of deadly force against someone. We do not find that it is reasonable to use state force to kill people when it cannot be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in many cases that they in fact committed such capital crime. So we actually worked with Democrats in the House to pass the bill. I'm pleased to say that the bill has passed both the House and Senate to abolish the death penalty. And the governor has promised to veto, which we would prefer that he not. We would prefer he sign it. But we have been trying to talk to him to get him to at least not veto it and have it become law without his signature. So that's just one example. On other issues with Republicans, for example, we supported constitutional carry, which was the repeal of the concealed carry permit requirement. We still do have a process for people to apply for a concealed carry permit so that they can have reciprocity in other states, but you are no longer forced to have such a permit. So that's just one other example.
I exercise that right quite frequently.
There you go.
Now, being libertarian as a whole, a lot of people don't understand what that is or what it means in your eyes and why you chose the Libertarian Party instead of Democrats or Republicans or any other third party. Why did you choose it?
Well, actually, let me give a little bit of backstory as to how I ended up re-registering as a Libertarian. So I originally, in 2016, I ran as a Republican. At that time, I was under the impression that the Republican Party essentially had a truce with libertarians within its ranks. I was under the impression that they would not work against us, that they would, at the very least, work with us to try to find some common ground as to where we agreed on certain policy matters. That turned out only to be true with regards to firearms. Apart from that, Republicans really do not care to work with libertarians in their ranks. On any number of issues, whether it be the death penalty, whether it be drug decriminalization, or even legalization with regards to cannabis. It's very, very rare to be able to work with Republican leadership, or for that matter, Democratic leadership on a number of these things. So I was, very early on, I was disenchanted with the Republican Party. They were actually, in some cases, even working against me. I had one bill in the first year to provide for the annulment of criminal convictions where the actual, not criminal convictions, criminal charges. The annulment of criminal charges wherein the charge was not actually pressed forward by the prosecutor. I know that some people might not understand exactly what that means. Essentially, it is if you were charged with a crime, but the crime was never actually prosecuted against you, the charge should be annulled. You should not have that on your record, and that should be done at no cost. Republican leadership came into the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee meeting on that bill, signed in against it, and very politely told me and the other sponsor that they would be instructing the chair of the committee to kill the bill. That's how politics tends to work. They see new people who get elected, and they, in the first year, will basically put their thumb down on you to make sure that your bills either don't go anywhere, unless they really like your bill. If they really like your bill, then they'll let it go somewhere. But generally speaking, even if it's something that they're not so sure of, they will put their thumb down and just kill it. I did not like that culture, that political culture of basically the Republicans saying, you're a young legislator, you don't know what you're doing yet, we know better, we're going to direct the policy. So I basically said after a couple of months of putting up with that, I said, well, I don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm going to create, or at least try to advance a policy agenda that I felt was more appropriate. And I found the best way to do that was to re-register as a Libertarian, to try to convince other legislators to join me in that effort, and then work as an independent caucus to try to sway the other two parties towards what I felt was a better policy agenda. So that's a little bit of the backstory as to why I left the Republican Party, why I ended up joining the Libertarian Party. But with regards to the question of more so what it means to be a Libertarian, that question is answered very differently depending on who you speak to in the Libertarian movement. There are some Libertarians who do not believe in the existence of government at all. There are some who believe in the existence of a small government. And anywhere in between that very, very interesting spectrum that is libertarianism. So it's very difficult to answer that question. But for me, what it means to me is that I do not believe that people should be initiating force, whether it's themselves as individuals or themselves in a group, without first having been aggressed upon themselves. And I believe that principle fundamentally applies even to governments, not just individuals and private groups. So,
being libertarian to me, it's in the name of the party. Liberty over safety, for me, honestly. I mean, if one person decides they want to go out and they want to use drugs, or they want to go out and buy a certain type of firearm, we shouldn't be restricting them unless they're known, or they're going to be, abusing it in a bad way and affecting other people. I have a very strong opinion against property tax and income tax, because what happens if you don't pay property tax? They take your home. It's an extortion fee. And as people will say, well, then who's going to pay for the roads? Who's going to pay for our military budget? Well, that's the thing. There are other forms of taxes. Property and income tax weren't around until the early 1900s, and even then, there was sunset clause. There was temporary. It wasn't permanent, and now it's permanent.
Just like Massachusetts' 40-year temporary sales tax.
Yeah.
That they have reauthorized every single year.
This is true. How do you feel the party is going, and is it growing? Have you seen it grow?
Oh, yes. Oh, my Lord. So in 2017, we had a statewide convention, and we only had 20 or so delegates. We may not have even had that. And I was, at the time, I spoke at that convention. I was the only legislator. I had switched from Republican to Libertarian, and we had the convention about a month and a half later. 20 delegates was, at the time, that was considered a lot. It was like, man, we got 20 Libertarians in a room together? Holy crap. And, we went over our existing platform, and we changed it somewhat. It was not really that exciting of a convention. However, the following year, after many organizing efforts trying to get people to re-register Libertarian and whatnot, we had a convention again on April 28th of 2018. And I'm pleased to say we set an a record for delegate attendance. We actually had 45 delegates, so we doubled in just 1 year delegate count-wise, and then we had a number of other people who were not eligible to be delegates because they had not paid dues to LPNH, who were there as observers. And even other people, we had other state legislators who are not even libertarians come. We actually had the former Democratic nominee for governor come to our convention. He's now planning on running for Secretary of State, so he's trying to court our votes, which I thought was kind of funny. But he came to our convention, and he actually liked something that we put into our platform. He liked the electoral reform plank that we had, because we called out partisan gerrymandering as a problem, which the Republicans have refused to do, and as of yet, the Democrats have not done it. I think they may have recently changed their platform. I'm not totally sure, but I'm glad that we can at least agree on addressing that particular problem, even if we disagree in how to go about it. So it's been very, very encouraging. I've seen a lot of growth membership-wise with regards to dues-paying members and just general interest. There's just generally a lot of interest in what libertarians are doing in New Hampshire.
Can someone register as a libertarian in the state of New Hampshire?
Yes, you can. You can go right to your town hall and you can just ask for a voter registration affidavit form. And whatever you are presently registered as, whether it's undeclared, Democrat, Republican, you can, just change it.
Mr. Jonathan, are you gonna go do that now?
I might have to.
Oh my!
It's a way to. I think personally, I don't think Republicans and Democrats, people have fallen for the two-party divide. And I think that's why there are a lot of libertarians within the ranks of Republicans and Democrats who just don't know yet about the Libertarian Party or quite what it is. They might have heard about it, know a little bit about the party itself, but they're not quite sure if they fall into that realm. There's also, I think, a problem with a lot of conservatives. I'm just going to make an assumption that a lot of conservatives are actually libertarians. They just don't know that as well. Now, government-wise, the people who are in government, I don't think that they are libertarian, a lot of them who are Republicans, because they want to infringe on our civil liberties, privacy, things like that. And Democrats, I feel they want to kind of take away and give to people who haven't worked for it, which is not the libertarian way.
I'm not so sure I actually fully agree with you on that. I think that some conservatives who would self-identify, call themselves, in other words, a conservative, I think that some of them might be libertarians, at least in principle and in philosophy, because I believe there is quite a difference between a philosophy of conservatism, wanting to not change things or wanting to conserve what is present, and versus libertarianism, which I equate more so to, I guess, anti-authoritarianism. It's the idea that we resist arbitrary control over one's life. So I think that some conservatives may very well fall into that libertarian idea set on philosophic grounds. But I think more appropriately, I think many Republicans would be classical liberals if they knew, or if they... In the United States, we have sort of perverted the meaning of the terms liberal and conservative. I actually did not grow up speaking English. I grew up speaking French. So the way that I used the word liberal as I was growing up was to refer to things that meant freedom, because, of course, the root of that word liber in the Latin means to be free, to liberate. So I think that many Republicans today would be, I guess, a classical liberal of yesteryear. And because, of course, there is somewhat of a difference between even classical liberals and libertarians. I would prefer if we worked together on a number of things. But there are still a number of differences with regards to what they believe that the state should or should not do. So with that slight caveat, I guess I would mostly agree that, yes, there are a lot of people who are ignorant as to what libertarian principle or libertarian ideas are. And, you know, the LP, at least nationally and at the state level, we call ourselves the party of principle because we are truly different from Republicans and Democrats in that respect. Republicans and Democrats, generally speaking, don't really have much of a guiding principle, whereas the Libertarian Party is very, very specific as to what our guiding principle is. We have it right at the beginning of our platform. And it's actually, if you haven't read it, I really, really encourage people to go read it. It's the Libertarian Party Statement of Principles. It's a very, very succinct 3-paragraph little thing, but man, it packs a punch. It is very, very weighty, and it describes very succinctly exactly what we believe.
Looking throughout history, I believe that the Libertarian Party was the first in kind of purest form of conservatism. They wanted to conserve the freedoms of the people. They wanted to keep, the government small with the anti-federalists, and then I believe it's kind of shifted into a 2-party divide, and they both want to infringe on our rights in different ways. But libertarianism, I believe, kind of started in the format of that was to conserve the people's rights and privacy.
I can't disagree with that use of the word conserve. I think that the way that the word to conserve or conservative has been applied politically as of late has not been in that context. I think that in large part the conservation has been to conserve the power of the state and the control that which it exerts over the lives of individuals. But I can't disagree with that use of the word conserve. So, in a way, yeah.
All right.
Why don't we take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the Young American Podcast.
Attention cigar smokers or even friends of a cigar smoker. If you're looking to relax with a nice premium cigar or looking for a great gift for a cigar smoker, this is the gift that keeps on giving. Our friends at twoguyscigars.com have created the Cigar of the Month Club. For just $19.99 per month, you or your friend will receive 4 different premium handmade cigars every month. Shipping and handling is included. Contact twoguyscigars.com, that's the number 2, guyscigars.com, and go to the Cigar of the Month Club. You can stop anytime because there's no contract, but you won't. This is a tremendous deal for our listeners. Go to twoguyscigars.com, that's the number 2, guyscigars.com, and click the Cigar of the Month Club. At the same time, if you want to learn about the cigars you receive each month, you can smoke along with them on their own podcast called The Cigar Authority. Sit back, relax, enjoy a nice premium cigar from our friends at twoguyscigars.com.
And we're back with the Young American Podcast. Here's Kid Constitution, Joseph Bemister.
Welcome back, guys. Caleb, I feel the use of social media is kind of the prime reason why the Libertarian Party, in my eyes, is growing. For instance, there are 2 pages, the Liberty Hangout, which was started by a Kent State University student. You saw the picture of her at her graduation?
Yes. So it's interesting. People, generally speaking, in the libertarian movement, Liberty Hangout is not very favorably viewed, as they have quite a socially conservative slant, generally speaking. But yes, I did see the recent picture that she posted about the rifle that she carried on the Kent State campus. I think it's excellent activism. I just wish it was generally done by other people, but yeah, no, they do good things, put good content out there. And was there another one? It sounded like you were.
The Liberty Hangout. It was a Liberty Hangout and Being Libertarian.
Oh yeah, Being Libertarian. I know some of the people involved with the Being Libertarian page, and they do, I would say, a much better job. In general, it's a lot more unbiased. It's definitely much more centered around the actual principle of the matter, as opposed to the policy side. So.
And then obviously there's the LPNH, which is local to New Hampshire, and different parties as well. You can find them the Libertarian Party of Denver, Boulder County. They actually just passed their gun ban.
That was very disconcerting to hear of. I think that it will likely be turned over in the courts out there in Colorado, but there's no way to tell just yet.
If not, I believe it's going to make it to the Supreme Court. They've already ruled on this subject before.
It largely depends on the district. So I don't know if it'll make it all the way to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is generally very, very wary to take up things like this. For example, the gun ban in Maryland that was struck down in the Fourth Circuit, I believe, was upheld in the First Circuit with regards to Massachusetts. So Oftentimes, federal court districts will disagree on rulings on these matters, and the Supreme Court generally doesn't want to make a decision either way. They generally want to stay out of the matter and let the lower courts decide. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the municipal bans, like the one that was passed in, I believe, somewhere in Missouri, I think, passed a municipal ban as well. It'll be interesting to see how they're decided, but I hope that they are stricken down because, of course, anything that, which infringes on your right to own any piece of property, I find to be abhorrent. So,
yeah. And it always starts small, too. It will start with a local government, go to county, from county to state, and then from state to federal. And that's how it's going to start, and a lot of people are saying that it's a great thing that they did, passing a gun ban. And
any ban on property is not a very great thing. If you're resorting to a nanny state tactic of saying no, you can't own that.
Yeah. It's like I saw a meme on Occupy Democrats, and there's also a counter page called Occupy Democrats Logic, and they take every post that the Occupy Democrats make and they rip it apart. And I think it's hilarious because it was a picture of a child hitting another child with a stick, and it said, "When my child hits another with a stick, I take it away." And they commented below, they said, yes, their stick. I don't take a stick away from every child because...
It's basically making the argument for due process of law, of course. Yeah, right. And another thing that was very, very disconcerting that actually relevant to due process and firearms, the current president, Mr. Trump, actually has a very interesting quotable moment from Twitter where he said, just take them away first, due process later. Yeah. What? Excuse me, Mr. President, have you read the Constitution?
He has not.
No.
That's, I believe, the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment. That's all those amendments work together. Yep. And we're actually studying those in my law class now. And our school resource officer, I don't know where he stands politically. I know he's more on the conservative side, libertarian side-ish, but
it doesn't matter as long as he's teaching the class fairly objectively. Yep. Yeah.
And my teacher was citing the Constitution one day and said we have to use our own notes. And per my IEP, I can use my handwritten notes. And I actually have a copy of the Constitution in my bag. And we were doing constitutional studies. And she basically said I was cheating, but per my IEP, I was like, I carry it around. These are considered my notes.
Oh boy.
I will use them if I need to. And I always carry it around with me, whether I'm at school or not. It's in my truck. I have a copy of my truck, my bag, just in case anything happens.
Oh yeah.
With the police, and they don't, I don't consent to any searches or seizures. Without probable cause. And probable cause is only granted through the warrant. In order to get a warrant, you have to have probable cause. You can't just skip that process unless they see the crime taking place.
I've got the New Hampshire Constitution so down, I don't even have to have a copy with me anymore. It's pretty sad.
And I think that's how every politician should be in every state, but that's sadly not the case.
Yeah. At least part first of the New Hampshire Constitution, you should really have that down. If you don't have the other parts down, that's fine, but, those are more relevant to, like, the actual inner workings of government and how to, pass a law or such things. But yeah, part first is important because those are your rights.
Yeah. So the two biggest, I believe, libertarians is Rand Paul and Ron Paul.
I would disagree. I think that the LP has largely abandoned the cult of Paul. Not to say that Ron Paul's not a great dude. Ron Paul sent me a handwritten letter one time, which shows you just the kind of integrity that he has. It's really kind of cool to see that. But I don't think that Rand Paul should be held up as an example of libertarian principle. I think that a number of his votes in the United States Senate have been less than productive. I could call them out, namely certain foreign policy things, actually. For example, his voting record on the use of force in countries like Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, even Afghanistan is, I think, troubling at the very least. But Ron Paul, while he was in the Congress, had a much more principled, much more consistent voting record. But I think the Libertarian Party needs to kind of move past the previous cult of Paul, because I think it's actually holding us back in a way. I think that by hanging on to these vestiges of, these libertarians who were working within the Republican Party, I think they're actually hindering their own growth. I think that they're not allowing themselves to kind of step out and say, well, we're actually different from Republicans. We don't believe all the same things that they do. We have legitimate policy differences and principle differences. And I think it's very important that we make note of those things and really be, I guess, more honest with the voter. Because I don't think that people like even myself, when I ran as a Republican, I don't think I was being totally honest with the voter in the sense that I was still in a party that I didn't fully agree with. And I think now that I've left, I think I am being more honest. So I think it's important.
And it worked.
Well, we've yet to see. In 2018, if I find myself back in the House of Representatives, I think we can call that working. But if I'm not in the House of Representatives, if the voters have decided that I am not worthy of representing them, then so be it. I'll go back home. But I would really like to stay in and continue to support the principles and ideas that I always have and always will. So
where do you stand, Caleb, on term limits?
I think that they're necessary. I don't think that they're necessarily at a state level because we have every single person in New Hampshire is elected every 2 years, all the way from governor all the way down to state rep. So I think that we kind of use elections the way that they're supposed to be used, like changing a diaper every so often. But at the federal level, I don't think that they are that elections are not being used to limit the amount of time that people spend in those offices. I think that term limits, at least for the Senate, if not for the House as well, are absolutely necessary. The reason why I say the Senate should be the target first of term limits is because the terms are so long.
Sure.
6 years.
You have 6 years in the United States Senate. Term limiting them at 2 terms, I think, is just fine. In fact, several senators from New Hampshire have self-term limited themselves. Senator Gordon Humphrey, who represented the state of New Hampshire from, I want to say it was in the 80s and 90s. I forget exactly how long. I think he left in 92. But he actually did not run for re-election in what would have been his 3rd term because he said, nope, I would like to limit myself to 2 terms. I feel that that's a responsible amount of time for me to spend in the Senate. And if I am politically involved, at any other time in my life, I'll do so at the state level. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. I personally would never run for a federal office. I've made this very, very clear. People have asked me, he's like, when you turn 25, Caleb, are you going to run for Congress? And I'm like, no, I will never run for a federal office. But I do believe that federal term limits are definitely something that we need to look at.
Do you think there's a value in making it so that any man can run, any person can run for office rather than right now you have to be fairly wealthy to run for national office. And then when you leave national office, it seems that you are part of the 1%ers at that point. I mean, you become super wealthy. What is with that?
It's tough to explain, really. I think that there are a couple of reasons for it, and it's not just one thing. A lot of people want to say, limit the limit money in politics. Well, how do you do that? I think the libertarian answer, I know I don't want to speak for all libertarians, but I think the more libertarian answer to this problem of money in politics is to not so much limit what people can spend on candidates, but to limit the power that the actual politicians themselves have over entities that which want to seek influence in government. So if you, for instance, you have a coal executive like the man Don Blankenship who was running for United States Senate in West Virginia, and he lost the Republican primary recently. He is, like many other people at the federal political scene, he purchases influence over politicians to have regulations be the way that they want them so that they can exclude other competition in their particular industry or what have you. So he's engaged in purchasing influence. What happens if those politicians that he's trying to influence don't have as much power to actually enact the changes that he wants to see? What if the government is involved less in regulating these entities and more in, I guess just leaving people the hell alone?
Yeah, let the free market sort itself out.
Within reason, I think markets work very, very well in terms of self-regulating. But I do think we need to absolutely work work back a lot of these regulations because they act more as protectionist instruments than they actually protect any individual. They protect more so the company that is transgressing upon either the rights or liberties of individual X as opposed to protecting individual X from those transgressions. So more back on the actual subject of like money and politics and addressing that. There have been suggestions that if you are an elected official that there should be some sort of voluntary agreement that in agreeing to run for office and represent your people that after you get out of office you agree to not go into lobbying or some sort of industry that is also involved in influencing government. That's also been tossed around. There have been a number of other ideas as to try to limit the post-governmental involvement of elected officials. I'm not so sure what solution is best, but I definitely know that reducing the power that government has to regulate such entities and such groups would go a long way towards reducing their ability to buy influence over themselves, I guess, policy-wise.
That's one hell of an answer, buddy.
Yeah. I try to give as complete of an answer as I can.
You nailed it.
Do you believe that the Libertarian Party on the federal level is going to grow, or do you think we'll see more people running for office as a Libertarian? Yeah, no. So in 2018, we're trying to run 2,000 candidates for office across the country. That's, it's still a low number, but it's for us, that would be incredible. I think that we're going to come close to it. Of course, I would prefer, instead of having just a quantity of candidates at 2,000, I would prefer to have very quality candidates. We've done, at least in New Hampshire, we've done a great job recruiting candidates to run for office. We have Justin O'Donnell, who's running in the 2nd District for U.S. Congress. He's a good friend of mine, very smart dude. He's worked in insurance for a number of years. He's also a Navy veteran. Just a really, really smart guy. And definitely worthy of the voters' consideration in the 2nd District. For governor, we have one person who's declared. We have Gilletta Jarvis. She's worked in private consulting for basically business management for a number of years. She is also very, very much worth the consideration of voters in that race. We may have another candidate for governor. We're not totally sure, but he actually ran for United States Senate as an independent in 2016. That was Aaron Day. Aaron Day may very well be running for governor as a Libertarian. He's decided he is done with the Republican Party. He's done operating outside of any of these political entities. He wants to try to make the Libertarian Party a viable vehicle to sort of resist the tyranny of the duopoly. So I thank him for throwing his support behind us and his vote of confidence, really. But we have so many candidates that are looking to run in various races. I mean, myself, I'm going to run for re-election. Brandon Finney will also run for re-election. He represents a district in Stratford, Rochester, wards 5 and 6, I believe. And Joseph Stalcup, the Democrat that switched to Libertarian, he's not going to be running for re-election because he's moving to go to school at UNH. So he's moving out of his present district. So we will have to forfeit that seat. But we'll have plenty of candidates across the state. And I look forward to seeing a few of them get actually elected as Libertarians, because I really do think that we have a message to pitch to voters that is radically different. And I think it will be a breath of fresh air to actually see those ideas fairly debated on the House floor. Yeah. I believe a lot of like a younger generation, my generation in particular, a lot of kids at school, friends on Facebook with me who were posting a lot, pro-conservative or pro-Democrat, and then I started posting pages, memes and things like that from the Liberty Hangout and
I'm sure that there's a lot of cross I'm sure, especially things like marriage equality.
Yes.
I think very few people want the government involved in their private business.
Exactly. Especially that type of business, like that shouldn't be interfered with at all. That's no one else's business besides the two people who want to get married.
Right.
And their family, of course, if they approve or not. But even then, it shouldn't have anything to do with the government.
One thing that I actually like to to kind of impart upon people, the first presidential nominee and vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party in 1972 were an openly gay man and a woman. And that went over like a lead balloon with voters in 1972. They were like, we're not ready for a woman to be vice president of the United States, and certainly not a homosexual as president. And then, look, here we are now, and we're like, yeah, we really don't care who you are. We're all just individuals. We can all do, the same good work, just like anyone else.
There's only one race, human.
Human race, yep, exactly. It's those differences just don't matter. And I find it truly incredible that Republicans still refuse to eliminate the word traditional from their plank on marriage. It has always been used to exclude homosexuals from their party, and they just don't want to acknowledge that. They don't want to acknowledge that they're excluding a group of people who basically would otherwise agree with them on a number of things, just because they can't get over this idea that, well, we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, and government should do something about it. No. Government shouldn't even be involved in licensing marriage in the first place.
That's a religious belief as well, too.
Right. If you want to have a private contract that says you want to have 6 wives or like whatever you want to do, you want to have some crazy living arrangement, go for it. Something that I'm pretty open about, I am polyamorous. I have more than one girlfriend. And one of my girlfriends has another boyfriend. It's not what some people are used to, but that's the way that I choose to live my life. And I don't make it very public, but I will share it. I'll occasionally in conversation, I'll say, yeah, one of my girlfriends, really, really likes X or whatever it is. And I was actually in the House of Representatives. I was speaking with Representative Betty Gay of Salem, and in Representative Gay, I mentioned to her that I had more than one girlfriend. She said, oh, if my father knew that I had more than one boyfriend, she would have shot my boyfriends. And I was like, well, okay, I don't know if that's a caged threat, but all right, Representative. So, I just think that things like that shouldn't even be an issue. We shouldn't be discussing whether or not the government has a role in X, because it just doesn't. Government does not have a role in regulating personal relationships. So.
I mean, it's your personal liberty if you want it.
Exactly.
All right. Guys, thank you for coming on again. This concludes this episode of The Young American. As always, we're live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Please like, share, and subscribe this. I'm asking you guys, if you enjoy the show, please show one friend. That really helps a lot, to be honest with you. If everybody shows one friend and they get into it, that doubles our numbers, and so on and so forth for the next weeks. And hopefully we can grow the movement and spread the word of being libertarian or any belief we share on the show.
If you can donate, do it. He needs the help.
Thank you.
No truer words have ever been spoken.
Next week, guys, we'll be talking about how the Air Force lost a box of grenades on the back of a truck in the Midwest, which I found pretty scary. North Korea threatening to desert peace talks because they don't want to fully denuclearize. And the United States, kind of why the vets of the United States military tend to lead to the right side of politics instead of the left, or now I've seen a lot of libertarians come out of the armed forces. Thank you guys, as always. See you next week.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.